It's interesting, you know, the UK is way down there, even though they're one of our partners. France isn't even really on the list, even though they're one of our partners. But India is. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, too. You also notice, real quick, let's go back to that, Pakistan is on the bottom on both lists. And right now I'm going to talk about why the Afghans might have Pakistan on the very bottom of their list. Amarullah Shah Salih is the Afghan intelligence coordinator. He's sort of their equivalent of our FBI director. And in 2008, he gave an interview with Der Spiegel where he asked a really interesting question. He said, according to his agency, the Afghan intelligence agency, the Taliban had fired about 1 million rounds of ammunition from their Kalashnikovs in 2008. So he asked a really interesting question I think we should all ask, where did they get 1 million rounds of ammunition? And I might suggest throughout the 1990s, the Taliban supported Pakistanis supported the Taliban. If you read, again, Hamid Rashad's book, or if you read Lawrence Wright's The Looming Tower on the Road to 9/11, or if you read Ghost Wars by Steve Cole, you'll see accounts of Pakistani soldiers actually on the ground when the Taliban took Kabul. They were providing air support and artillery support. So that's one place the Taliban might be getting their ammunition. Here's another place. Hekmatyar, who is another insurgent leader who's probably currently in Pakistan. If you read the New Republic this last month, there's an article entitled Our Man in Afghanistan, and it's about Hekmatyar. And Hekmatyar worked for the Pakistanis since 1980, since the Soviet invasion, and the Pakistanis brag about their connectivity to Hekmatyar. They say, oh yeah, he's our guy, we know where to find him, we can deal with him if the United States wants to talk to him, wants to negotiate with him. So that's another place that 1 million rounds of ammunition might have come from. And the Haqqani network was behind the recent killing of the CIA operatives in Afghanistan. And they've been described by both Pervez Musharraf and Kayana, who is Pakistan's equivalent to like a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as a strategic asset. So those are all places that the Taliban may have gotten their ammunition. This was just today. Actually it was published on the 9th of April. This next weekend, Pakistan is going to have a war game on the Indian border. Now, while they have that whole ungoverned area on their border with Afghanistan that they tell us they don't have enough troops to control, they're managing to move 50,000 troops to their Indian border to have a war game. And we paid for it with $7.5 billion of our tax dollars. So here's a little bit happier news. I'm going to talk right now for a couple slides before I finish up about what India and China are doing. And I think that there's some positive things going on. The Chinese are putting about $3 billion into a copper mine. The Indians are putting about $1.3 billion in aid and infrastructure this year. India is actually now Pakistan's #1 foreign aid contributor. And the United States is actually doing things beyond security also. We're building a series of commercial roads throughout the whole region, again, not just in Afghanistan. Here's a map of some of the things India is doing. I think one of the most interesting things they're doing is actually taking on the whole project, paying for and building Afghanistan's new parliament building. Now here's the INAC copper mine. This is a $3 billion project from China. $3 billion doesn't sound like a lot of money to us, but it's 7.5% of Afghanistan's GDP. China's also going to build roads and schools. Here's Chinese soldiers. This is a pilot program that's just starting. Chinese soldiers working to train the Afghans. Again, I think this is really positive. So what I'd like to see from our president is to pay as much attention to building a body to coordinate regional players as much as he does the climate change and nukes and frankly some of these other, I don't think that important foreign policy issues. When we have troops committed to Afghanistan, if he's going to leave troops in Afghanistan, he really needs to be working, I think, to try to coordinate these other players that clearly want to be involved. And clearly when you see China committing $3 billion, they'd like to play a role, but I think we don't do enough to coordinate with these other countries. And finally, I'm going to leave you with 3 books that I really recommend. First of all, of course, Charlie Wilson's War. The movie's pretty good, but the movie's not necessarily all that historical accurate. But the book is very good. Descend into Chaos by Ahmad Rashid and Ghost Wars by Steve Cole. I think Ghost Wars by Steve Cole has got to be the single best volume on America's involvement in Afghanistan. It's a thick book, but it's really worth it. A lot of good information in there. And with that, I'll open the floor for questions.
I have some. What do you think, and I mean, there was no real answer to these, but I know you've thought about them. What do you think about the recent kind of positions that Karzai is taking in terms of
He's trying to establish his anti-American, is that what you're talking about?
well,
saying,
and undercutting the whole counterinsurgency movement potentially.
well, you know, first of all, he's made that crazy statement that he's going to join the Taliban, maybe. And then Goldbruth came out and said that he thinks Karzai is a drug addict. I don't know if you saw that on MSNBC.
Yeah, he didn't, although since his brother is a...
Yeah, his brother is basically like Denzel Washington, an American gangster, right? I mean, I think that Karzai is trying to play the hands that he's been dealt. If the United States leaves, in the 1990s when the United States left, Pakistan will back the Taliban, okay? And again, I'm making an argument here, they might be backing the Taliban right now.
No.
So he is trying to cultivate other friends in the region, and I think especially he wants to cultivate a relationship with Iran. Again, if we look back to the 1990s, Iran, Russia, Turkmenistan, Turkey backed the Northern Alliance, who were friendly with Karzai. He doesn't want to be caught in a country that's run by Pakistan's ISI via the Taliban. I think that's what's going on.
I think he's repositioning.
Yes, he's hedging his bets.
Right. Although the lack of a stable, you know, one of the consensus of policy views is that it's very difficult to build a successful strategy like this without a partner.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And I've read, I wondered if you've probably seen this because you're into it way more than I am, that the military is now starting to move away from Karzai support and build their own network of support.
Yes, they want to. Yeah, I mean, my take on it is, you know, the military says clear, hold, build. And what we have to remember is our military is great at clearing. When American troops show up, the Taliban take off into the hills. But when you get to that hold and build scenario, for the hold scenario, you've got to have some people who have local knowledge. You've got to have some local partners. And then when you get to the build scenario, frankly, you've got to have greedy businessmen who want to make money, who want to start building. I mean, seriously, you know, you've got to have some,
like you say, then they have an interest.
Right,
so as
right,
China invests,
right.
as India invests.
Right.
Don't you have to have military to support the safety of building something?
Yes,
There?
yes, and I didn't get to that because I had a 15-minute presentation, but I would really like to see peacekeepers from China and India. If they're going to benefit, especially China, if they're going to benefit militarily, and I showed that picture, there's a couple of pilot programs, they're training some explosives disposal people from Afghanistan. They're also doing some police training, but I mean, to be really blunt, I'd like to see 10,000 Chinese peacekeepers if they're going to benefit that much from that copper mine that's going to pay dividends for decades and decades and decades. I think they should have some skin in the game. I think India would probably like to give us some troops. They have a great peacekeeping capacity. They're one of the leading contributors to UN peacekeeping forces around the world. The problem is Pakistan doesn't like that.
Right.
And Pakistan has blown up the Indian consulate in Kabul a couple times already. I mean, that's the real problem. But of course, I make the argument we're funding Pakistan too through our foreign aid. I'd like to see us get a little bit more serious with Pakistan and say, here's the way it's going to be, or we're going to cut you off.
Historically, though, Pakistan's been in the way of a lot of this.
Yes. Oh, yes. And again, if you read these books, you'll see Pakistan's fingerprints are all over it.
Well, and I always wonder what you're thinking about this, because I say these things in class, but can't really prove it. Whether, you know, these are really the places we think they are. They look like, your use of maps is great, by the way. But what maps can sometimes be misleading about is that that's really Pakistan.
Yes,
I don't think
that's an excellent question.
Pakistani government controls that part of Pakistan.
That's a great question.
That's a good point.
You know what the interesting thing about that is, and Rashid in his book is great because he's from Pakistan, he speaks all these local languages. And it's very difficult for us English speakers to find anybody who has any knowledge. He says that there is an Afghan identity, that there is an Afghan national identity, and the idea is that should be, in other words, he says that probably should be a border, but Pakistan has not yet legally recognized it since 1947. And they have been offered, Karzai has offered to recognize it, and they haven't done it, because they want an international legal precedent that says that they can cross the border if they want to. So, you know, I can't recommend Descent to Chaos enough. I think it's a great book. Are there any more questions?
Very good.
Thank you.